Welcome to the Doghouse. Have a listen as we take a look at life, love, and art in all its forms. Here's your host, the Rock Dog, Andrew Davis.
On this show, I'm going to introduce you to Elaine Campbell, because Elaine has a tale of survival. You see, she was fishing with her partner, and as they were going to go beachcombing, something happened and the skiff overturned. Elaine watched as her partner died and then spent 5 days alone on an isolated island before she was found. But her story of survival actually began years before, when she was adopted as an infant. As Elaine suffers from agoraphobia, I went to her, sat in her living room, hit record, and we began. So Elaine, where are you from? Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Vancouver General on the mainland and adopted out, and my parents raised me on 2nd Street in Courtenay, BC.
You were adopted?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you find out young in life, or?
I was an infant.
But did your parents tell you, when did your parents tell you, like when did you find out?
They didn't tell me. I was at an age where at least I could read, type, print. And I went snooping in their closet. They were out for the afternoon, and I found a paper, like documents. I didn't know. I just started reading, and I saw that I was adopted, and that it was, my real name was Terry Ann Hopkins, and they had renamed, my adopted parents renamed me Elaine Dorothy. And so I realized, I knew enough to know that what adoption was, and I kept it to myself. I couldn't, I didn't know how to. First off, say I'd been snooping in your closet.
Yeah.
And am I adopted? Even though I saw it on the paper, I needed to ask, but I couldn't. It didn't come out for quite some time, probably over maybe a year or two. And then my mother, when I did bring it up to her, my mother didn't question, well, how did you know that? Then I did tell her I'd been looking in the closet and saw these papers, and she said, yes, we adopted you. We couldn't have children of our own. And that was basically it. She never sat me down like I think parents these days would sit the child down and say, do you have any questions? Do you want to talk about anything, and what can we tell you more? And no, that was it.
I think
Case
it was
closed.
a different time back then, I think, for adoption too, wasn't it?
It
It was all
yeah.
closed and secreted and everything's locked away.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was.
Did you ever get a chance to, I guess you never met your birth parents? Did you get to even find out who they were? Or?
I found out my father had been stationed at Cold Lake, Alberta. My mother was from Blairmore and still lives, if she's still alive, she's still living in Blairmore, Alberta. And she married and had raised a family there. But I've never met any of them. So, but we spoke. My mother and I spoke occasionally on the phone, or would send each other cards, but I don't know. I didn't feel, there was really no real attachment other than she was my mother, because I always said to her I would love to hold you and hug you, but she never spoke like that. And I had a brother and sister, and I would like to have met them. Maybe they weren't happy about me, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I was never outwardly asked, would you like to come to Alberta and we'd like to meet you? No, it wasn't. I didn't, I wanted to be close, but my mother already had her family and raised and had grandchildren and stuff. So, whatever, we're all different.
Have you thought of exploring it more?
No.
No?
No. That I can leave alone.
Yeah. Do you have any siblings that are with you adopted? I guess if they couldn't have kids, did they adopt more? Or?
How do you mean?
Your adoptive parents.
Oh, no, they just adopted me. And as my mother's sister said some years later when I was older, that my parents should have adopted a puppy before they adopted me. So she put it in a nutshell. My mother did not know how to mother, how to bond, my father, they're both older people. And my father formerly was a school teacher, and then when they moved here, I believe he went to Comox logging, and liked that better. He was more of a fellow who liked nature, and I knew that, just from the short time that I had him as my father. He passed away. But my mother was totally neglectful, and so when my father was at work, I'd be in a playpen placed in front of the old Bendix washing machine with the window with the suds going and everything. I guess she thought that was so very entertaining for a kid to watch that day in and day out. And I remember laying there. I think that's my earliest memory of that, was putting my head down on there's sort of like a little cushion thing in the crib, and laying my head down and seeing her with her back to me at the counter, and seeing this big rubber type old pattern ball that I had to play with in the crib, and going to sleep. Like, I was so freaking bored. I was a bored little girl until I was able to climb out of my crib and out of the playpen.
Yeah.
Then I was a handful.
You had a wild childhood?
Oh, I was a totally wild little girl, yeah. I mean, I had, right on the bank of the Puntledge River, I had the flats to go right next door down.
Yeah.
I back in that time, I'm 4 years old, wandering the neighborhood, going into the Sims garden and raiding their peas, and making friends with the gardener. And he had a little cabin there on the property, and he was really, I think his name was Pete, and I'd go and visit Pete. And down on the flats, I'd make forts or go looking for rocks, stones, pretty things, whatever, treasures. That's how I busied myself. Or the other main thing, too, was when it was the right season, I'd do the lanes behind Fifth Street stores. Eaton's was there at that time, too.
Yeah. And
they'd throw out all sorts of different things. And then I got wise to... there were wildcats around kittens, and some of them had these terrible eye infections, so I had an old, a canvas tent, and I turned that was my hospital, and I brought those kittens. My mother wouldn't let them inside, but I had them in the tent, and I could zip the tent shut and treat their eyes.
Yeah.
And I was doing it properly. She had told me how I could do that, so then I would eventually get homes or set them back free again, because I couldn't keep them all, or I would have. So that was a real highlight of my life, being able to rescue those kittens. I also found a lot of abandoned places around here, like houses literally abandoned. One was on the railway tracks, a tiny little one just behind the Native Sons Hall, right sitting on the little bit of a bank there. And I cleaned that place up. I got my mom's broom and different things, and I swept the place all out, and I made it like it's my home. And I really felt at home there, except I had to go back to my parents' house. And I made a lot of little homes around my area. Made one out of a chicken coop, swept all the whatever, swept it all out, and that was it. And then another one. I remember so many of them. Now you can't even, there's so many people that are homeless, so you can't even find anything to have some kind of shelter. But anyways, that was back in the day. And, my mother wanted me to be a very refined girl, young woman, or an upward, marry a doctor or a lawyer. And I was not girly, certainly not girly, so far away from girly, but they gave me the odd, I wasn't showered with a lot of gifts and toys at Christmas or any time. But they kept it very, very simple. So I was given a baby doll that actually you could put a bottle to its mouth, a little baby bottle, and it would, of course, water would come out the other. Oh my, she's wet. I got to change her. Well, that didn't appeal to me. I thought that's just stupid. So they also gave me a pram, and it was after an old English pram that they used in London, those places, great big pram for a baby. Well, this was a smaller one, but it was still a good size for me, and I'd take that up to the top of the hill on 2nd Street, which is not super steep, but enough for, I was about 4 or 5 years old, enough for a kid to get a ride, I got into that buggy, and I let her rip down the hill, and the thing, it wasn't a paved hill, so I hit him into the gravel, and I veered off to the right, and the whole thing capsized and threw me out, and I broke my nose. And that was, that's what I thought of. I mean, the doll buggy had no interest other than to be used for something like that.
Right. No maternal use for it.
They just couldn't. My mother, I say they, but it wasn't my father. My mother just couldn't get me into all these little dolls and things, and it just didn't appeal to me. I wanted to be out and about and raiding pea gardens and scouting around the neighborhoods. I think that was back in the day where you never had to think about locking your door. It was just, there's so much freedom then, and it was such a gentler time.
Yep.
Then, whew. And
small town.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, 5th Street was 5th Street. And you had Leung's, and you had B&W Theater. 20 cents to get in for a matinee on Saturday. I mean, it was a lot of fun that way, Yeah. And, of course, everything was a lot cheaper. And, but that goes from generation to generation, because I heard my mother speak about it a lot, too, that, things were so much less expensive. But she came from the Depression era, so it took her, I think, 5 months to save up $5 a month in order to buy a winter coat. So money, was hard to come by.
Yeah.
But some groceries were by far cheaper. But anyway, we're living in an age where now the dollar seems to be worshipped, and everything rotates on the dollar bill. There doesn't seem to be getting any away from it. I think making trades and bartering and different things are a wonderful way to go. I think there needs to be more of it. I think women need to start trading their clothes, getting together and having socials together at a house. And, I mean, God, they have Botox parties now. I mean, getting their lips all fish-like and everything. Who want? But to recycling, because we're in this time, we need to improvise. And yes, the thrift stores are wonderful. I love to shop the thrift stores. But I also feel that a lot of people could have lots of fun. Women, even men, if they wanted to, trade your clothing, have a party, trade your jewelry, trade your makeup. Oh, I'm not using this. Do you want, whether or not that'll gel, or maybe it's happening somewhere out there and good for people if they're doing it, because I think that would be just wonderful, a lot of fun.
Yeah. Were your adult years spent here in Courtenay too, or did you go anywhere? Did you travel?
When I was about 8 years old, my father had a stroke, and he couldn't work. It affected mostly his right side. Hand was paralyzed. So my mother was an RN, so she went back to nursing out at St. Joseph's. And my father lost his speech also. After a time, my mother thought it would be better that we moved to Victoria, where her relatives were down there. Well, I was actually really happy that we were moving, because for a great part of the time in my younger years, my aunt who lived in Victoria helped to raise me, and when I was with her, I was really a very happy child. She interacted with me. She showed me, she'd been a seamstress, so she made dresses for me, but she showed me how to do stitching on the machine, and And they lived up on the rocks. This was on Beach Drive in Victoria, and the beach was right across the street. So I'd run down all these steps because they're way up high, and across the street and get myself dunked in the water and then run back up. And Uncle Eddie, my uncle, had at the base of the rock at the back of the house had blasted, you could blast then, he blasted a big pond, like it was fairly deep at one end, and made a pool. So that's where I learned to swim. My aunt taught me to swim there. And there was so much life. She was full of life and pizzazz. And let's go for a walk. Sometimes it was, I think we need to have a nap. Well, I didn't like the naps. I was such a live wire. Anyway, I'd have a nap and wait out the 20 minutes. It was 20 minutes, thank God. And then she'd go about her day, and I'd go back to playing. Met lots of kids in that area. There was an old witch that lived in this fabulous home. It's still there, but she was the witch. She lived by herself, and she had long white hair, and actually she was really a very lovely, lonely old lady. But we used to, well, let's go see the witch. And so we'd be there at the door, and she'd answer, and eyes, and she'd invite us into her kitchen, and she'd made us just happened to have made us some molasses taffy, right? So we'd all get some of that, and then we'd look, and we'd see this huge staircase that's going up, like one of those sweeping staircases, and we thought, ooh, and she's got kids locked up in there. We were so intent that this was a real witch, but she was. So I don't want to name her name because she was so by far not a witch. She was a lovely, when I look back, she just loved kids, She wasn't out to throw us in the oven. And, so then at times I went to Sir James Douglas School down there. I attended a kindergarten down there, too. And so I had these wonderful times with my aunt and my uncle, and all that environment, and it was so positive to me and so beautiful, and I felt love. And when I was told my parents had to come and pick me up, come and take me back to Courtney, I'd be kicking and screaming and crying and so very traumatized. I know I was traumatized. It was that bad that I needed to be with my aunt and uncle. And later on in years, my aunt said, "You were the daughter I never had." And she said, "I wish, we wanted to take you. But the thing is, as my Uncle Ed said, it would cause a lot of problems in the family." But basically, Aunt Hilda wanted to raise me. She knew what I was lacking. Yeah. She said she came once to the house in Courtney, unannounced, like she didn't call my mother to let her know they were coming up, my aunt and uncle. And they passed by the back porch, which the kitchen window where you sit at the table is there, and she saw my mother with her head in her hand, and came in and went into the nursery, as she called it, my room, and she said, "There you were, soaking wet and dirty, your nose running and everything, jumping up and down like a wild animal in that crib." She said, "God knows how long you'd been in there. There's dirty diapers strewn all over the floor." And she said, "Because your mother didn't expect us." You see. But my mother suffered from a very, very, very harsh depression. That was the problem.
Yeah.
And so she had problems when she was younger before she met my father. I think one of the reasons why she was able to get married was because she was older and my father was older. And that worked for her. To become a nurse, both her sisters said they didn't know how Isabel ever became a nurse because she was so timid and so... But she was a very good nurse. Yeah. She was very well liked. Eventually, she would become addicted to some of the drugs from the hospital. She had a broken leg when she was 2.5. The leg didn't heal properly because their mother, who had a litter of children, I have to say, was so intent that Jesus would heal my mother's leg when my aunt was saying, no, Isabel's leg is, no, it didn't happen. So as my mother grew up, she had terrible back problems. And when she met my father, she was in a lot of intense pain. And so she went and had x-rays done, and it showed that, the doctor said, it shows you had a broken leg. Oh, no. My mom said, no, I've never had a broken leg. Well, yes, you did. And it didn't mend properly. So that gave her chronic back problems. She had to have disc surgeries and stuff. But I think what was happening was because she had to go back to work because my father had lost his speech and he was still partially paralyzed. That was all she could do.
Yeah.
The pension he received from Crown Zellerback was something like $30 a month. When it first happened, the stroke first happened. So, my mother being in pain, she started, getting up the medications at the hospitals when she worked at the Veterans Hospital for many years. We lived right directly across the street. I didn't know she was dependent on drugs until after she had passed away, and my aunt told me that that's what was keeping her going, because she was in a lot of pain. And just before my mother died, she had another surgery on her back. So she was a very stressful woman. And she had had a stroke when she was 13 years old. So you see, she was affected. She had had a hard go of it.
Yeah. And
when I used to make her angry, one side of her face would twitch. I thought it was, what's going on with you? I mean, I was a teenager when was she winking at me or what? But then, yes, I'm laughing, but at the same time, when she told me, it was because she had had a stroke when she was 13, then I was taken aback. I didn't understand totally strokes. I knew that Dad had had a stroke, but I mean,
yeah.
It was yes, and I got used to it, because she said, really vexed with you, Elaine. I'm really vexed. And I wasn't sitting there and laughing. I'd be like, oh, and I knew I'd done wrong most of the time, It was just a matter of getting found out. But, yes, she had, and she also thought she was pregnant when my dad and her were first together, and her stomach grew, or she didn't have her normal period, and it turned out they removed a huge, they had to do a total hysterectomy. She had a huge fibroid inside. So she was incapable of having children. Yeah. So she had had a hard go of things. And I know for years I was pissed off. It still hurts a bit that I was neglected. I still rock myself to sleep at night, as I did when I was an infant. And my aunt said that my dad used to count, he'd sit by the crib and count how many times I rocked till I went to sleep. But why wasn't someone holding me or talking to me or doing something?
Yeah.
You don't leave a baby like that. Anyway, that's what was going on. And then I had two babysitters, Pat and Claire. They weren't very old. I'd say Pat was maybe 9, and Claire was maybe 10 or 11, and they babysat me, and they lived kitty corner across the street. And my parents would often go up to the church meetings at St. George's, and different things. They were left to babysit me right from infancy. So when I was older, I brought some things up to my mother. And she said, oh my gosh, yeah, because they did some things to me. But as an infant, I wouldn't remember, but when I got a little older, there were things they did that I did remember. But my mother said to me when I brought up that they had been doing things to me, that she felt that they had put me in very, very hot water when I was a baby, because they kept asking if they could bathe me. And my mother would say no, not until she's a bit older. Well, she said, I think they took it upon themselves, because she said, you always love to have a bath, and then I went to give you a bath, and Pat and Claire had babysat you, but she said, I want to give you a bath, and you were just terrified. You didn't want anything to do with it. You were screaming. Yeah. So, we don't have the words then. But we have a voice of some kind of howl, and we're terrified. But to fast forward some years later, I guess I was, 5. Pat and Claire had a doll's house, we called it, but you could go inside. And they had like a little bench in there along one wall. And we used to play in there, and there was never really any problem, But this one day they got me to take my pants down, lay on that bench, and they were going to try and insert this bottle in my vagina. And all I knew as a little girl, 5 years old, that was really wrong. That's not right. Something's really wrong with that. So I went home and I told Mom what Pat and Claire had been trying to do. And my mother didn't say much to me, but she took me by the hand. I'll never forget. I remember holding her hand and walking over to their place. But my mother went inside. She left me outside. So I don't know what was said. But to this day, I often wonder, did my mother ever bring it up at all, what had gone on? Or did she just go in to have a conversation because she could have a cup of tea with her mother? They knew each other. Everyone knew each other back then. Soon after, she came out and took me home, and there was never a word said. And Pat and Claire were able to still keep babysitting me. And then I could never, as I got a little bit older and started learning a little more about things that were wrong and right in life, I wasn't protected. I didn't feel protected. I felt totally hurt, at their mercy, at my parents' mercy, not just at Pat and Claire's mercy, but at my parents' mercy. Not so much against my father, because he was at work during the day. On the weekends, he'd be home. He was a beekeeper. He had things to do around, and he was fun. He was fun to be around, and he was mischievous too, and I liked that about him. He liked to pull pranks, and he liked to laugh. So I feel if my father had lived, to be older, I would have been very, very, very close to my father. But it was the loss of his speech, where I couldn't ask him questions about his childhood and about, he used to have an Indian bike, a motorcycle, and he lived life. Yeah. Whereas my mother was very timid, and my her mother was super, super religious, to the point where Jesus will take care of all. We'll just keep having these litters of kids. One got run over by the streetcar, and another one died from it. But we've got all these kids. They believed in having a huge family back in the day, because back in the day, the family is what, as they grew, they worked around the farm or whatever.
Yep.
So, yeah, life can, it sounds to me a complex life, but I know many, many people who may be listening or hearing me, actually hearing me, know you might not have had the exact situations, but you know overall what, say, the word neglect feels like. And if you have children of your own, that's probably one thing that you have made a point of. You don't neglect the children. You want them to know that they can be heard and they can come to you at any time, because your heart is open and you're there for them. Yeah. And I missed out on that so bad. So, yeah. Then when I got a little bit older, Pat and Claire weren't babysitting me anymore. It was this man across the street, directly in the house across the street. And I say this man, he actually had a wife, but it seemed when my parents went to those church meetings, his wife would go to a whist game, play cards, some kind of card game, and I'd be left alone with this man. And he started in on me, and he'd have me on his lap, and I remember I was frozen, and we had side zippers in our pants and not flies. Men did, but not girls and women. And he doesn't do that. And it was like being a statue, frozen. And it's like I think what the brain wants to do is remove you, make you totally removed from that situation. And that's the only way you can do it, because you can't, you're just scared to try and get out of there. Aren't you frozen? Scared. Anyway, that went on repeatedly. I only have one recollection of being in another room, and to this day I still don't know whether it's accurate or whether it really happened. But it's a bedroom, and I see a dark wood corner shelf, and I see a headboard, those headboards they have with the sliding doors, headboard. That's it. Like, I don't remember what happened at all. I've searched every little nook and cranny to see if I can come up with some little fragment that could... No. So, I have no idea if I was in that room, if that room even exists. But, anyway, then my father had the stroke when I was around 9 or 10, and the idea was to move down to Victoria. My mother could work down there. Her sisters were down there. Thank God I was going down there. I thought, thank you, God, I'm getting out of Courtney, because, sure, as much as I like gallivanting around, I wanted my aunt to spend time with my aunt, and Victoria had nothing but good memories for me. So we moved down. Only problem was, well, it wasn't a problem. I was just angry at the time, because the house directly across the street from my aunt's house, my aunt, you get a picture, her house was up on the rocks, and then you go down all these walkways and ramps and you get to the road, and across the street on the beach side, and it's still there because I saw it just recently, was a house that was built on stilts on the beach and up. And once that house is taken down or ever falls, whatever, no one will be able to build there again. But it was the same price, $17,000, as the house that my mother bought, right directly across the street from the Veterans Hospital on Richmond Avenue. And I mean, I would have had my aunt, hi, I would have been waving to her, and I had to be living in this house. Well, then the next thing that's on the list is that Elaine's going to private school. That would have been my aunt, the other one who treated me terribly. She was very stern, British. Oof. My uncle was just, if he could crack a smile, I don't know. But I was scared of both of them. And they had a daughter who was mentally challenged, and she could beat on me, and I'd tell my aunt because I was scared of her. But my aunt didn't stop her. And I hated to have to stay with them, but sometimes I had to. I had no choice. Maybe something was going on, Van Hilden. Just couldn't happen, because she would have taken me, Anyway, yeah, so I had a taste of that too, how stern people can be, and how when you're young, you got to sit at a table and eat these frickin' baked beans. And to this day, and I used to regurgitate them. They'd come back up in my mouth, and I'd have to swallow them again. My uncle's sitting there, and he's got these little thin-framed glasses on, and he's staring at me. And I have to stay at that table until that bowl of beans is gone. They knew I hated beans. They knew that. By then they knew that. I knew I'd been there, stayed there long enough in the past or whatever to know that They knew I did not like them. So why are they giving them to a kid? You know? What are they getting out of it? Go figure.
Yeah. I think a lot of adults forget that kids are human.
Well, and it's also because maybe they're not, I know the good aunt Hilda, she said, well, Dorothy picked on you a lot because their daughter was challenged. And these were very wealthy people. This aunt, they were very wealthy people. Elizabeth was used to having the latest dolls and all this kind of stuff, and she was girly, and they just took her on cruises all over and just shrouded her with luxury and wonderful things. I mean, she had it, And I was in like a wonderland when I went into her bedroom, and it was big, and it was like but you can't touch it, because that's Elizabeth, That's okay. You know how kids want to touch. We're all curious. But anyway, so that was the difference, Oh, and then I got called a stealer, and that was traumatic for me. So, yeah, I was always a bit of a live wire, like hard to settle down. So, anyway, I discovered these cough drops called Luden's Honey and Licorice. And they don't make them anymore. They make one. Luden still puts out these cough drops, but they don't have the honey and licorice, which really chokes me. Anyway, I discovered these cough drops in their medicine cabinet. Oh, my God, I love them. And so it was bedtime. I went to bed. Well, everyone's in bed. And so I crept down to the washroom, closed the door, got in that medicine cabinet and grabbed another couple of cough drops and back to bed. Well, I guess I did this maybe 4 or 5 times. And my uncle, I was keeping them awake. I don't know, I was trying to be quiet. But I guess I got suspicious something's moving about in the house. So how they figured it out, I don't know. But my uncle came, he opened the door to the room I was sleeping in, and he said, he had the box of cough drops, but there's hardly any left. And he said, "You've been stealing our cough drops." And standing at the foot of my bed with this look on his face, and he was so stern. And he said, "That's stealing." And I can laugh, but thank God you can laugh about these things now. But at the time, I was frozen with fright. I didn't know what next. Mm-hmm. I felt so badly, too, that I've been caught. Because no one likes being caught, especially when you're a little kid and you're onto something pretty good, Mm-hmm. And they were treats. It was treats to me. So, they were so good. And so, of course, I got wired to them, when I got a little older and wiser to Luden's honey licorice cough drops. Those were at the top. I don't know that I can say much more other than, yeah, I can, because I was thrown into the private school. And my average was about 94%. So I came in there, and there was a headmistress called Mrs. Seeley, and this was called Westerham Private School, and it was on Rockland Avenue, just off Fort Street in Victoria. How could I ever forget? I went there, and we had to wear brown and yellow uniforms, just lovely color coordinated, and Mrs. Seeley was the headmistress, and always, sometimes she walked with a stick, and then she made us be doing this with a stick for her posture, very English. She had a husband, his nickname was Pip. She had a son, Robin, and they all lived in this, it was a mansion turned into classrooms down on the main floor. They lived in the middle floor. If you're boarding, you're up on the 3rd floor, and oh boy, that was awful up there. Anyway, she seemed to be very nice to me, and I seemed to be doing fairly well when I started into that school. But I found that what she believed in was like centering kids out and and making it known amongst the other kids what she had to say. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, because I was so thin, my mother hated shopping. She was working all these shifts as a nurse, and she didn't like shopping, and so I didn't get a lot to eat. And so Mrs. Seeley, one of the first things when she did start in on me, it was I didn't look healthy. I wasn't wholesome, and she'd point out, like, you're not wholesome, like Marilyn. And Marilyn was a big and I don't think I would have ever looked like Marilyn, you know. But that hurt because my mother used to compare me to other kids, but over other things. Why can't she be like so-and-so? That used to hurt. Or I wish we hadn't adopted you. I wish we'd adopted a boy. Things, lovely things like that, you know, kind of came out of her mouth.
I think it all served you well with your story of survival.
Well, I believe that it taught me to be, right from the get-go, I think I was being shown to have compassion and empathy for other people, because I was dealing with a hard time. I didn't know how to deal with these things. How does a kid make sense out of that in their mind? Yeah. And their minds aren't fully developed. They haven't lived enough life to know parents can be idiots. Adults can be bullies. And that Mrs. Seeley certainly was. And it was the Easter holidays. I was playing down the road on the front lawn with my girlfriend. We were just playing around, and I noticed a bunch of people up on the property, because our house was on the corner and no fence. It was open, and there's all these people in the yard. So Sandy and I, my girlfriend and I, went running up the sidewalk to see what's going on. And there's my father on the ground. He had got a makeshift frame that was really made to hold the old oil barrels. Well, he shifted that over, got that over to the pear tree, and decided he was going to prune it. And apparently got up on the frame, and I guess lost his balance or something. And there he was lying on the ground, and there's all these people milling around, and my mother, and then my Aunt Dorothy, the miserable one, came over, and everyone's in like shock, milling around. The ambulance has been called, and my father was taken away. And he was put in the hospital just down the street, the Jubilee. And Mum didn't talk to me about him or say anything that had happened. I know people were saying outside, oh, Ross has probably had another stroke. No one realized really what had happened. They just thought he had a stroke and fell from it. And some days later, I wanted to see my father, and I went to the hospital on my own after school, and I was told what room he was in, and I went to the room. It was in the old part of the Jubilee Hospital, and they had the great big huge windows you pull up and down. I walked in there, and he's the only one in there, and he's on I didn't know what kind of a bed or what kind of an apparatus he was laying on, what was going on with him. It looked like some Frankenstein. Like, it was a striker bed, I believe, and he had broken his neck when he fell. He didn't have a stroke, he broke his neck. But my mother hadn't told me, so I didn't know what all this stuff was around. His head's back in this thing, and he's totally horizontal and just smiling at me, sort of making gestures to acknowledge me. He knew I had come to see him. And I left there. I never went back, but he died soon after. But I couldn't handle seeing him like that. And my mother didn't explain to me ahead of time that he had broken his neck and this is what to expect, or even offer to go with me at some point, or someone to go with me. And so when I said to Mom, I asked her about this whole setup with my dad and his head and all this, and she said, oh, well, Ross broke his neck. That's when the first thing I heard, that he had broken his neck. No one sat me down and said, listen, your dad has broken his neck. What's so difficult about a parent or someone explaining that to a child. I was, 12. Then he's laid out at the McCall's funeral home in Victoria. My mum and Aunt Hilda, my wonderful aunt, we went there. My mother wanted to see him the day before the funeral. And I picked a few little flowers that were around where Dad would be around out in the yard, so they weren't anything fancy, but they were just natural and beautiful to me, and I wanted to just place them with him. Well, they opened up there's a window there. We were on one side, and then we walked in, and he was in a coffin, but you could walk in to the coffin. And just as we were about to leave, I placed the flowers by his hands. And Mum said, "Oh, give Dad a kiss goodbye." Oh, that was... I know she meant well, but it was hard to kiss him.
Yeah.
He's dead, to feel his lips. And I remember sitting in the back of that car all the way home. I would touch my lips with my tongue. I had to wash my face when I got back to the house. I was silent. I didn't say anything. I didn't protest. I didn't say I don't want to kiss him. I don't dare say something like that. I mean, I felt it was the thing I should do. Anyway, I was off school for 4 days, 5 days, maybe a week. And then when I went back, none of my friends, none of the kids would talk to me. I didn't understand what was going on, what was happening. We had an assembly every morning where we all met. We sang a hymn or whatever, and there was talk about what maybe if there was going to be grass hockey and this and that, or tests coming up, whatever, just things in general. Update on what was going on. Well, when I wasn't at school, when I was still away from school, Mrs. Seeley had announced to the kids that Elaine's father has died and she's responsible for his death. And the kids, of course, kids, they take it like I might have murdered him. They wouldn't talk to me. And so I went 3 days. And finally, I remember the girl, Edith, she came up to me and said, "Mrs. Seeley said you're responsible for your father's death when he died." I didn't. I think it was just too much, And I went home that day. When my mother got off work, I told her what Mrs. Seeley had said with the kids. Repeated to me. So I remember I was in the kitchen. My mother phoned Mrs. Seeley. I was there. Mrs. Seeley seemed to be doing all the talking. My mother was very passive. She had no spine. Let's put it that way. I mean, she didn't have she would stand up for me. Or stand up for even her rights. She just was too, as her sister said, timid. So my mother's on the phone to her, but she's not saying, "How dare you," or, this, that, or the other thing, like I would have. Well, then my child would have been out of that school so damn fast, and I would have been to a lawyer. Anyway, Mom got off the phone and she said, Mrs. Seeley said, "We shouldn't have adopted you." Great. Well, I was sort of getting the drift of that myself by then. By that age, I knew something wasn't, Anyway, I think that's when something inside me broke, because I had done fairly well with my grades and everything, I lost my concentration. I lost so much. I didn't want to go to school anymore. I didn't want to go out the door. I got sick every morning. I'd play sick. I didn't want to go back to that school. I didn't want to go to any school. I didn't want to leave the house. And that's shameful. That started the shame. That started the whole problem in my life of being held back. Like, I wasn't, I had a bubbly personality. I loved people, but I was so terrified to be out. So it took a lot away from me. I missed out on a lot of life. And people didn't have an understanding. And so there were times, yes, when I was able to, I'll say I was in a better headspace or something, whatever it was good. And I was able to go ice skating and do things with other kids. And then something could happen, and I could be triggered, and I'd go back into this isolation.
Part 2 is available as well. I continue my discussion with Elaine. We talk about her first husband, Tony, and of course we also talk about the time that she was alone on that beach for 5 days.
You've been listening to The Doghouse with Andrew Davis.